The night Kang Min-Jae walked into Naomi Carter's life, she was holding a coffee cup, minding her own business, and wanting absolutely nothing from anyone. He nearly knocked her sideways without a word of apology, just a cold glance and the kind of silence that expected her to move. She didn't move. Most people in that city would have. Most people understood what it meant when a man like Kang Min-Jae looked at you that way. Naomi Carter was not most people. And that single moment, two strangers, one collision, zero apologies, was the beginning of something neither of them could have survived alone. If this is your first time here, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens between these two will shake you. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Bob. The Hartwell University faculty reception was the kind of event that existed to make wealthy people feel cultural. Catered wine, string quartet bleeding softly into marble walls, professors in blazers standing near paintings they didn't understand. The university's East Wing had been opened for the night. A private donor event, invitation only, the kind of gathering where money wore a tie and smiled with its mouth only. Naomi didn't belong there, and she knew it. She had been sent by Professor Ellison to deliver a folder of student composition scores to the administrative desk near the East Corridor, a task that should have taken 4 minutes. She wore her good hoodie, the dark green one with no visible stains, and carried the folder under one arm with her campus ID lanyard still swinging against her chest. She had her coffee in her other hand, medium roast, no sugar, still too hot to drink properly. She was thinking about the chord progression she'd been fighting with for 3 days. She was not thinking about where she was walking. Neither was the man who came around the corner. He moved fast, the way people move when they are accustomed to space clearing itself in front of them. 2 men flanked him several paces back. Not security guards in the obvious sense, but something about the way they held themselves made it clear their job was not decorative. The man himself was in a charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open. He was not particularly tall, but he carried himself like gravity worked differently for him. Dark eyes, hard jaw, the kind of face that had learned early to give nothing away. The collision was partial. His shoulder caught her forearm. The folder skidded across the floor. The coffee tilted. The lid held, barely, but the impact sent a thin stream of liquid across the back of her hand. Hot. Not burning, but close. Naomi sucked in a breath and turned. "Hey!" He had already looked down at the folder on the floor. He looked at it the way someone looks at something a staff member will pick up. Then he looked at her. His expression did not change. "You should watch where you're going," he said. His English was precise, faintly accented, Korean underneath the American polish. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Naomi stared at him. In the 4 seconds of silence that followed, she ran through several possible responses. The smart one, which involved picking up the folder and leaving without engagement, was dismissed almost immediately. "I should watch where I'm going," she repeated. "Yes. You walked into me. I was walking in a straight line. So was I." Something moved behind his eyes, not softness, not quite amusement, something closer to the way a person looks when they encounter an unexpected variable. He didn't apologize. He didn't look away. He simply waited, as though she were a delay he was willing to tolerate for another 30 seconds before moving on. One of the flanking men stepped forward and crouched, collecting the scattered pages from the floor with efficient hands. He straightened, offered the folder to Naomi. She took it without looking at him. She was still looking at the man in the charcoal suit. "You're welcome," the man said, as though the apology he hadn't given had been received. He moved around her. The 2 men followed. She stood in the corridor with hot coffee on her hand and the absolute certainty that she had just interacted with someone she would be smart to forget completely. She didn't forget him. Naomi found out who he was 3 days later, not because she looked him up, but because Priya told her. Priya Anand was Naomi's roommate and closest friend, a doctoral candidate in ethnomusicology who processed the world through information and delivered that information whether requested or not. She sat cross-legged on the common room couch with her laptop open and her tea going cold, describing the Hartwell donor reception and the names attached to the major contributions, which she had found in the university's published transparency report, because Priya read transparency reports. Kang Min-Jae, Priya said, pointing at her screen without looking up. Korean national relocated stateside 12 years ago. He gave the East Wing renovation a check with a lot of zeros. Clean on paper. International consulting, real estate, private equity. She paused. But Marcus in the political science department says the money is old, and old money in his family's sector doesn't stay clean. Another pause. People in certain circles apparently call him something. I'm not going to say it out loud because I think saying it out loud is how you end up on a list. Naomi looked at the photo on the screen. It was a formal image, some business function, probably from a trade publication. He was in a dark suit, same jaw, same expression that gave nothing. I met him, Naomi said. Priya's head came up. Briefly, he walked into me in the corridor and didn't apologize. Priya stared at her. You're telling me Kang Min-Jae walked into you and you're sitting here drinking tea? I had coffee. He didn't apologize. I told him he walked into me. What did he say? You're welcome. Priya closed her laptop slowly. Naomi, he runs... She stopped, looked at the ceiling. Some very serious people are afraid of him. I'm going to just leave it at that. He was rude. I wasn't going to just stand there. Most people stand there. Then most people have a problem. Priya opened her laptop again. She had the expression she wore when she'd decided that worrying about something was useless because the thing had already happened. Don't interact with him again. I don't intend to. This was a true statement when she made it. Naomi's life had a structure that she protected carefully. She was 23 years old, 3 semesters from completing her music composition degree, and she had built her daily existence around the things she could control. Her practice schedule, her coursework, the careful and deliberate distance she maintained from anything that felt like it wanted too much from her. She had friends, Priya, a loose constellation of other musicians, a few people from the jazz ensemble who texted her memes at odd hours. She had a social life that looked, from the outside, like confidence. Inside it was architecture, every wall placed on purpose. The economics requirement was the one thing she hadn't controlled properly. Hartwell had a cross-disciplinary mandate for all undergraduates, one course outside your primary school, approved by your academic advisor. Naomi had taken Introduction to Macroeconomics in her second year with the intention of finishing it easily and never thinking about it again. She had not finished easily. The professor, Dr. Stein, had a reputation for being rigorous and a talent for making fiscal theory feel like a punishment. Naomi had ended the semester with a passing grade, barely, and had never looked at the material again. She thought about this now because of what happened in the library. She had been there for 5 hours working on the third movement of her composition thesis when she noticed, 3 tables away, Kang Min-Jae. He was not in a suit tonight. Dark jeans, a plain dark shirt, a jacket folded over the chair beside him. He was alone. No flanking men. He had a textbook open in front of him. She could see the cover from where she sat, and a legal pad covered in handwriting. He was pressing his pen against the page with enough pressure that she could see it from across the room. His jaw was tight. He turned a page, read something, wrote something, and then very quietly closed the textbook, put his hands flat on the table, and stared at the wall. He looked, in that moment, like a man trying not to throw something. Naomi looked back at her score sheets. Her pencil hovered. She did not think about Kang Min-Jae. She thought about him for the next 40 minutes. He was still there when she packed her bag. She took a different route to the exit, which happened to pass his table. She told herself this was a more direct path to the door. She did not look at the textbook cover as she passed. She absolutely looked at the textbook cover as she passed. Advanced Macroeconomic Theory, Dr. Stein's class. She recognized the green spine. She kept walking. She left the library. She walked back to her apartment in the November cold with her composition bag on one shoulder and the very deliberate intention of not thinking about why a man who apparently ran a criminal empire was struggling with the same course she had barely survived 2 years ago. She didn't sleep well. Vincent Parker was the reason she was still enrolled in the Tuesday evening chamber ensemble, despite having more than enough performance credits. She would not have admitted this to anyone, including herself, for very long. But Priya had an irritating ability to observe things accurately, and had stated it plainly 6 weeks ago. "You're in that ensemble because of Vincent Parker," Priya had said, not looking up from her work. "I'm in that ensemble because the repertoire is interesting." The repertoire is Baroque transcriptions. You hate Baroque transcriptions. "I've grown." Vincent was a third-year composition student with a sound design background and the kind of focused intensity that Naomi associated with people who were going somewhere. He was thoughtful. He asked good questions in seminar. He had once said something about modal jazz that had made her think about it for 3 days. He was also, in her experience, entirely unaware of her existence beyond the general collegial acknowledgement that they occupied the same programs. This was a circumstance she had no plan to change. She was good at admiring things from a safe distance. She had years of practice. It was Priya who pointed out, gently but without mercy, that what Naomi called emotional safety looked from the outside like exactly what it was: someone waiting for feelings to expire on their own rather than risking them. Naomi didn't argue. She filed the observation in the same internal cabinet where she kept everything she wasn't ready to address yet. She ran into Min-Jae again on a Thursday. She was coming out of the campus cafe with breakfast she'd bought too late to eat sitting down. He was coming in. The door was a standard single entrance. They saw each other at the same moment. Neither of them stopped moving immediately, which created a brief and undignified traffic situation in the doorway. Naomi stepped back. So did he. Then they both stepped in the same direction. She exhaled. "This is my fault again, presumably," she said. He looked at her. She watched him place her, the corridor 3 weeks ago, the coffee, the folder on the floor. Something registered. "You're the woman from the faculty reception." "I'm the woman you walked into at the faculty reception. There's a distinction." "You're the one who argued with me." "I'm the one who stated a fact. You walked into me. That's not an argument, it's a description." He was quiet for a moment. She couldn't read the quiet. With some people, silence was discomfort. With him, it felt like evaluation. "You study here," he said. "Music composition." "Yes." "Not the School of Business." "Correct." "Then you know Stein's macroeconomics course." She went very still. "Why would I know that?" "You were in the library last Tuesday. You looked at my textbook." She felt her face attempt to do something she controlled before it arrived. "I glanced at a spine while walking past." Dr. Stein's Advanced Macroeconomic Theory. Green cover. You recognized it. She looked at him steadily. "I took his introductory course 2 years ago." "How did you do?" "Why?" He wasn't embarrassed by the question. He wasn't embarrassed by anything, apparently. He simply stood in the cafe doorway and waited. And his waiting had that same quality she'd noticed in the corridor. The sense that he had allocated a fixed amount of time to this exchange and hadn't reached the limit yet. "I passed," she said. "I need someone who can teach this material, not a general tutor. Someone who has been through Stein's structure specifically and can translate his methodology into something functional." He paused. "I can compensate you." Naomi stared at him. "You're asking me to tutor you." "I'm describing a service arrangement." "You walked into me and didn't apologize, and now you want me to tutor you." "I'll apologize if that's the variable that moves this forward." She almost laughed. Not from amusement, from the sheer architecture of how he'd said it. He would apologize not because he felt it was owed, but because it was a functional trade. The apology as currency. She found it repellent and oddly honest at the same time. "No," she said. "I have a thesis to finish." She moved past him into the doorway, and he let her pass. She walked 3 steps, then stopped without knowing exactly why she stopped. She turned back. He was still standing there. He was watching her with the same steady, unreadable attention. "Why can't you hire a graduate student from the economics department?" she asked. "I have 3. The issue isn't intelligence. It's that Stein's grading model is idiosyncratic and poorly translated by people who understand the theory but haven't been examined by him. I need someone who has sat in his classroom and survived his assessment format. And you think I have that. You took his course and passed. You recognized the textbook, and you didn't immediately agree to help me when I offered money, which means you're not operating from financial pressure, which means your decision will actually be yours." Naomi stood in the cold morning with her breakfast going colder in her hand. He was strange. He was dangerous, according to Priya. He was the kind of man she had spent years learning to recognize as someone to walk away from cleanly and early. "I'll think about it," she said. "I'll be in the library Friday at 7, he said. "If you come, we can discuss terms. If you don't, we won't speak again." He said it without threat, just as a fact, the kind of fact that expected to be treated like one. She walked back to her apartment and did not eat her breakfast and sat at her keyboard for 40 minutes without playing anything. She told Priya that evening. Priya set down her mug. "Naomi, I know. He is asking you. I know. Do you know? Because I want to be sure we're operating from the same information set, which is that this man is not a university donor. He's a... You said you weren't going to say it out loud. I'm reconsidering that policy." Priya looked at her, really looked. "Are you going to go Friday?" Naomi picked at the edge of the couch cushion. She had a bad habit of doing that when she was trying not to say something. The cushion had a fraying corner that she had personally made worse over 3 semesters. "It's a tutoring arrangement," she said. "Naomi, with very clear terms and compensation." "Naomi, and I would be the one setting the terms." Priya pressed her hands together slowly. "You are one of the most intelligent people I know. I say this so that what I'm about to say lands properly. You are walking towards something that has a very specific kind of gravity. And the problem with gravity is that by the time you feel it, you're already inside it." Naomi thought about that on Friday night as she walked toward the library. She told herself she was going because it was a clear financial opportunity at a time when her scholarship covered tuition, but not much else. She told herself the professional distance would be easy to maintain. She told herself she was the one with something he needed, which meant the power in the arrangement was hers. She stepped through the library door at 7:04. He was at the same table. The green textbook was open. The legal pad was beside it. He had a second chair pulled out across from him, which she chose to interpret as presumptuous rather than prepared. She sat down, put her bag on the table, looked at him. "You came," he said. 4 minutes late, intentionally. "So we're clear on how this works." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, an acknowledgement. "Terms," he said. "I set the schedule. You don't contact me outside of sessions. You don't involve me in anything outside of academics. And if I tell you the arrangement is over, it's over. No renegotiation." He nodded once. "What do you want in exchange?" he asked. This was the moment she had rehearsed on the walk over. The financial number she had prepared. The clean professional transaction. She opened her mouth. What came out was not the number. "Vincent Parker," she said. She had not planned to say that. She had not known she was going to say it until it was already in the air between them. Min-Jae looked at her. "The composer. He doesn't know I exist. You know people. You have reach. I want an introduction, a real one. Something that puts me in the same room as him in a context where I'm not just another student." The silence stretched. "You want me to engineer a social opportunity?" he said, "with a music student. With someone I've been trying to find the right moment to meet for 2 semesters and haven't managed because I don't do things like walk into people and act like it's their fault." He studied her. This time the evaluation felt different, not dismissive, not assessing her as an obstacle, something more careful than that. "That's an unusual request," he said. "I'm an unusual person." He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to make her wonder if she'd overstepped into something she couldn't walk back from. Then he extended his hand across the table. "Agreed," he said. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She shook his hand once, firmly, and let go. The deal was made. Neither of them understood yet what they had actually agreed to. The first session lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes and ended without either of them saying goodbye properly. Min-Jae had the textbook. He had the legal pad. He had apparently been working through Stein's chapter on aggregate demand modeling for the better part of 3 weeks and had arrived at a wall that his previous 3 tutors had walked him up to and then failed to help him scale. Naomi could see this within the first 20 minutes, not because he said so, but because of how he'd annotated the margins. The handwriting was tight and controlled in the early chapters, the notes methodical. By chapter 7, the pressure of the pen had increased. By chapter 9, there were places where he'd written something and then crossed it out so hard the paper had nearly torn. She recognized that kind of frustration. It was the frustration of someone who was genuinely intelligent trying to operate in a system whose internal logic they couldn't yet hear. "You're trying to memorize the formulas," she said. He looked up. "I'm learning the material." "You're memorizing it. There's a difference." She turned the textbook toward herself, scanned the page. Stein doesn't test formulas. He tests your ability to apply them under conditions he changes mid-question. If you've memorized the framework without understanding why each variable behaves the way it does, his exam will take you apart. A silence. "How do you know how his exam works?" "Because I failed his first midterm," she said, and she said it flatly, without apology, the way she'd learned to say things that were true and unflattering. "Then I went back and learned it differently. You don't need more information. You need a different angle in." He studied her. Then he said, "Show me." She showed him. They worked through 2 sections. She didn't soften the material or slow her pace unnecessarily. She read him quickly enough to know he didn't need either. But she translated Stein's methodology into something with internal structure rather than isolated rules. She asked him questions instead of giving him answers. He got 3 wrong before getting the pattern, and when he got it, he wrote it down without saying anything. And she could see from the change in his posture that something had clicked that hadn't clicked before. He didn't thank her when they finished. He gathered his materials, looked at his watch, and said, "Same time Wednesday." "I'll check my schedule." "Check it now." She looked at him. "Please," he added, in the tone of someone reading a word from a list. "Wednesday at 7, she said, "and the please needs work." He put his jacket on and left. She sat at the table for a moment after he'd gone, alone in the quiet of the library, and tried to identify what she was feeling. It wasn't discomfort exactly, it was the specific unease of having been more present in a room than she'd intended. The Wednesday session went faster. He'd done the work between meetings. She could see it in the annotations. The pen pressure normalized, the questions he came in with sharper than the ones he'd had Friday. She pushed him harder, and he pushed back, not defensively, but with the particular energy of someone who had located the problem and was now actively working at it. They argued about one model for 20 minutes. She was right. He acknowledged it with a single nod that she recognized, eventually, as the equivalent of a longer concession from someone else. 2 weeks passed this way. The Vincent Parker development happened on a Tuesday night. She hadn't been expecting it. Chamber ensemble practice ran until 9. She was packing her cello case. She played cello as her secondary instrument, though her real instrument was the piano, had always been the piano, when she heard someone behind her say her name. She turned. Vincent Parker was standing 4 feet away, holding a folder, looking at her with the expression of someone who had been directed toward her and was still calibrating the reason. "Naomi Carter," he said. "You're in Professor Ellison's advanced composition seminar." "Yes." "I heard you're working on a thesis piece, extended orchestral form." "A concerto structure, yes, with some non-traditional elements." He nodded slowly. "I'm doing a project on contemporary composition methods, specifically how composers are pulling from non-Western harmonic systems. I was told you'd done some work with Korean pentatonic scales in your earlier pieces." She had. A second-year project she'd nearly abandoned twice before it resolved. "Who told you that?" she said. He named a name. One of the faculty advisors, someone with connections to the broader music department. The name was entirely plausible. She couldn't prove it wasn't genuine. "I'd like to hear your perspective on it," Vincent said. "Maybe coffee sometime, if you're open to it." She said yes. She said yes with the right amount of calm and not too much eagerness, and he gave her his number and said he'd text, and she watched him leave and then stood in the practice room for 30 seconds doing absolutely nothing. She texted Min-Jae from the parking lot, which was the first time she'd texted him because the terms of their arrangement specified she wouldn't contact him outside sessions. She typed, "The Vincent thing happened." He responded 11 minutes later. "I know." She stared at her phone. "You know, I was informed it went well." She stood in the cold with the November wind cutting through her jacket and felt something she couldn't immediately name. Not gratitude. Not exactly. Something more complicated than that. The recognition that he had done the thing he said he'd do, efficiently and without requiring her acknowledgement, and that this should have felt good but instead felt like being in debt to someone whose currency she didn't understand yet. She put her phone in her pocket and walked home. At the Thursday session, she didn't mention Vincent. Neither did he. They worked through Stein's chapter on monetary policy transmission, and she pushed him through 3 practice problems, and he got 2 out of 3 right, and argued about the third until she showed him why he was wrong. And he went quiet with the pen and wrote it down, and she noticed he was left-handed, which she somehow hadn't noticed before. "You've been doing this for how long?" he said, not looking up from the page. "Tutoring?" "Music." She considered. "Since I was 7. Piano first. The rest came after." 7, he repeated. Something in his voice, not quite interest, but the sound of information being placed somewhere. "Why?" "My father started my business education at 6, he said. "I was curious whether the timeline was similar." She looked at him. "That's not a comparable situation." "Why not?" "Because I chose music. At 7, obviously someone put me in front of a piano, but it became mine. Your situation sounds like... Like what?" She stopped herself. She had been about to say something that was none of her business. "Never mind." "Say it." "It sounds like a curriculum," she said. "Not a life." He was quiet for a moment. His pen had gone still on the page. She watched his jaw tighten and release. "That's an accurate description," he said. They didn't talk about it again that night, but the door had been left slightly open, and they both knew it. The problem with Priya was that she watched things. It was an academic habit that had calcified into a general way of being, observation as reflex. She watched the way Naomi came home from Thursday sessions with different energy than she'd left with. She watched Naomi eat a full dinner instead of picking at food half distracted by her score sheets. She watched Naomi sit at the keyboard after sessions and play things that weren't the thesis piece, exploratory things, harmonic experiments, the kind of playing you do when something in your brain has been opened up. She said nothing for 2 weeks. Then, on a Sunday morning when Naomi was eating cereal and reading through her composition notes, Priya sat down across from her and said, "How are the sessions going?" "Fine. He's actually learning it. His previous tutors didn't." "I'm not asking about the economics." Naomi looked up. "I'm asking about the sessions," Priya said carefully. "That's the same question." "It's not, though." Naomi put her spoon down to Priya. "I'm just observing. You come home from these sessions and you play. You haven't played for yourself in weeks. You've been so inside the thesis you'd stop touching the piano for anything personal. And now, he's intellectually engaged. The sessions are genuinely demanding. It stimulates my brain and then I play. It's a very simple cause and effect." Priya looked at her with the specific kindness of someone who has decided not to argue. "Okay," she said, "don't do the voice." "What voice?" "The voice where you say okay, but mean something else." "I mean, okay," Priya said, and picked up her tea. Naomi ate her cereal. She did not think about Kang Min-Jae. She thought about him for the rest of the morning. The thing that broke the surface wasn't a session. It was a Tuesday in December, when the temperature had dropped suddenly, and the heating in the university's practice wing had decided to stage a protest. She'd been working in a practice room for 4 hours, and her hands were cold and her concentration had been fraying for the last hour when she packed up and left, and found Min-Jae standing in the corridor outside. She stopped. "We don't have a session today." "I know." He was in a coat, not the suit jacket, a heavier coat, dark wool. He looked like he'd come from somewhere else and hadn't planned this stop. There were 2 men behind him in the corridor, far enough back to be discreet, close enough to register. "Then what are you doing here?" "There's a problem," he said. She shifted the weight of her bag. "What kind of problem?" "Seo-jin Ho, one of my associates." He said it without inflection, the same way he talked about everything. "He's been informing certain people that our arrangement is not academic." She stared at him. "Meaning what?" "Meaning he's suggesting that you're in a relationship with me." The corridor was cold and her hands were stiff inside her jacket pockets, and she stood there absorbing what he'd said. "That's insane," she said. "Yes. We have a tutoring arrangement. I'm aware of what we have." "Then correct him." I corrected him, Min-Jae said. The way he said it made her not want to ask exactly how. The problem is that the story has already moved. People talk. The rumor is circulating in certain circles, which means it will reach the university environment within days. She breathed out through her nose. The air was cold enough to see it. What do you want me to do about it? Nothing, he said. I wanted you to know before you heard it from someone else. This was unexpected enough that she didn't respond immediately. She had anticipated that this conversation would include a request, a modification of their arrangement, a strategic suggestion about how to manage the narrative. She had not anticipated that he had come to tell her something difficult simply because she deserved to know it. Thank you, she said finally. He nodded and started to turn. Min-Jae. He turned back. It was the first time she'd used his name, his given name, without the formal prefix. They both registered it. What does this Seo Jin-ho want? She said. From spreading a rumor like this. He looked at her for a moment. He wants to test whether I can be embarrassed, he said. He wants to see if there's something in my life that he can use as a pressure point. And am I? The question hung in the cold air. No, he said. You're a business arrangement. She nodded. Right. He left. She stood in the corridor with her bag in her cold hands and told herself that the feeling in her chest was not what it sounded like. The rumor reached Priya by Thursday morning, delivered through 2 separate channels within 12 hours of each other. Priya knocked on Naomi's bedroom door at 7:30 a.m. and said, through the door, "Tell me what's actually happening." Naomi opened the door. She'd been awake for an hour, already dressed, already dreading this. "It's not real," she said. "Whose definition of real are we working with?" She let Priya in. She told her the arrangement, the full arrangement, including the Vincent component, which she hadn't mentioned before. Priya listened without interrupting, which was not her default behavior and which meant she was managing something carefully. When Naomi finished, Priya was quiet for a long moment. "You traded tutoring services for a social introduction to a man you find interesting," Priya said. "Yes." "With Kang Min-Jae?" "Yes." "And now his associate is telling people you're together?" "Yes." "And he came to tell you personally?" A pause. "Yes." Priya looked at the ceiling. "Naomi, what are you doing?" "Having a tutoring arrangement that got complicated." "What are you actually doing?" She didn't answer that one because the honest answer had too many moving parts that she hadn't finished examining yet. The coffee with Vincent happened the following Monday. He was smart and focused and exactly what she had expected him to be. He asked intelligent questions about her composition process. She asked intelligent questions about his research. The conversation was genuinely interesting. He was genuinely interesting. When it was over, she walked back across campus in the December cold and waited to feel something. She felt the echo of an interesting conversation. She did not feel the thing she had expected to feel, the thing she'd been building toward for 2 semesters. She felt, somewhat disturbingly, like she'd checked an item off a list. She didn't tell anyone this. She went to the Thursday session. Min-Jae was already there. He looked tired, not in a way he would have admitted, but in the way the body refuses to fully hide what the mind insists on ignoring. The line of his shoulders was slightly off. The pen pressure on his notes had gone heavy again. "Rough week," she said, not quite a question. "Business matter," he said. "It's handled." "Is it?" He looked up. "You look like it isn't," she said. His jaw tightened. "We should start the session." "We will." She sat down, put her materials on the table. "I'm just making an observation." "I don't need observations." "Apparently you do." Something shifted in his expression, something brief, almost unguarded, that he closed down before it fully arrived. He looked back at the textbook. The fluorescent light above them hummed faintly. She could hear his breathing from across the table, slightly more controlled than it needed to be, the breathing of someone managing something deliberately. She started the session. They worked for 40 minutes. He made an error that he'd made before, a specific conceptual mistake in his understanding of interest rate models, and she corrected it the same way she had 2 weeks ago. He wrote it down. Then he put the pen down. He knows about our arrangement, he said. She went still. Seo Jin-ho, Min-Jae continued, he knows the structure of it, that you're tutoring me, that I arranged the introduction with Parker. How? Someone in my staff talked. He said it without visible emotion, which meant the emotion was being held somewhere she couldn't see. He's going to use it. To do what? To make it appear that you are a liability, he said, that I've allowed someone without connections to this world close enough to be used against me. He paused. In my industry, that kind of vulnerability is exploited. She kept her voice steady. What does that mean for me? It means Seo Jin-ho will make things uncomfortable for you, publicly, if he can. He'll try to embarrass you out of the picture. Why not just ask you to end the arrangement? Because that would require him to confront me directly, Min-Jae said. He's not willing to do that. She absorbed this. Outside the library windows, the December dark had settled. The library was mostly empty at this hour, only a few other students scattered at distant tables. This isn't what I agreed to, she said. No, he said. It isn't. I should end the arrangement. Yes, he said. That would be the intelligent choice. She looked at him across the table. He was watching her with that same careful, unreadable attention, and she had learned enough about him by now to understand that underneath the stillness, he was waiting for something. Not waiting for her to stay, necessarily, but waiting to see who she actually was. But you passed the Chapter 8 practice exam, she said. He nodded slowly. And Stein's midterm is in 3 weeks. Yes. And if you fail the academic requirement, there are consequences for you that go beyond a grade. He was quiet for a moment. The family investment structure requires demonstrated academic standing. If I fail, my father has grounds to initiate a management review. He would use it. She looked at the textbook. She looked at the legal pad where she could see his notes from tonight, the handwriting that had improved over 6 weeks from something strained to something almost steady. She thought about Seo Jin-ho. She thought about the word liability. She thought about the specific kind of man who tries to embarrass a woman out of a room, because confronting the person he's actually afraid of requires a courage he doesn't have. She picked up her pencil. Chapter 9, she said. Interest rate policy and inflation targeting. You've been avoiding it. A silence. Naomi, you've been avoiding it because the mathematical components are more complex than the other chapters, and you don't like working in front of someone when you're not sure you'll understand it quickly, she said. I've noticed. We're doing it tonight. He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite what she'd call gratitude, not quite what she'd call surprise. Something that didn't have a name yet. You understand what you're choosing, he said. I understand I'm tutoring you through an economics course, she said. Open the book. He opened the book. They worked until the library closed. When they stepped outside into the December cold, the 2 men who had been waiting near the entrance fell into position without comment. Min-Jae stopped on the steps and looked at her. Walk safely, he said. Always do. She started down the steps. She was 3 steps below him when she heard him say her name. Not her last name, not Miss Carter, just her name, the way she'd said his in the corridor 2 weeks ago. She turned. He was looking at her from the top of the steps with his hands in his coat pockets, and the cold air moving between them, and his face held in the careful arrangement she'd spent 6 weeks learning, was not indifference, but the closest he'd ever gotten to letting something show. Seo Jin-ho will move soon, he said, before the midterm. Okay, she said. When he does, if he approaches you or says something publicly, I can handle myself. I know you can, he said. And something about how he said it, not condescending, not procedural, but with an understanding so direct it felt like being seen, stopped her from responding for a moment. She turned back and walked down the steps into the cold. She was halfway across the quad when her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. Does Min-Jae know you're meeting with Vincent Parker for something that isn't coffee? She stopped walking. She looked at the text. Read it again. The cold felt different now. Not weather, something else. She looked up across the empty quad, dark trees against the December sky, and the full weight of what she had walked into settled onto her shoulders with a quiet, deliberate certainty. Seo Jin-ho had already moved. She stood in the middle of the quad for a long time. The cold came up through the soles of her shoes. The text sat on her screen bright and patient, and she read it 4 times with the specific attention of someone trying to find the mistake in a thing that has no mistake. The words didn't change. The number was unfamiliar. The implication was not. Does Min-Jae know you're meeting with Vincent Parker for something that isn't coffee? She thought about the Monday meeting. She thought about how straightforward it had been, how genuinely academic, how Vincent had asked about her use of non-Western harmonic systems, and she had explained and they had talked for an hour about things that mattered to her professionally and nothing else. She thought about how the whole interaction had felt. In retrospect, slightly orchestrated, not by Vincent, she didn't think, not consciously, but the way a stage is set before an actor walks on. She put her phone in her pocket and walked back toward the library. Min-Jae was still on the steps. He hadn't moved far. He was speaking quietly to one of the flanking men when she came back up the path, and he saw her before she reached the steps, and something in the way he read her face made him finish the exchange quickly and step toward her. "Show me your phone," she said. He looked at her steadily. "What happened?" She held the phone out. He took it, read the text. His expression did not change, but his hand stilled on the phone in the way hands still when the brain is processing something at a speed the body is trying not to show. He handed it back. "He moved faster than I expected," he said. "What does something that isn't coffee mean?" she said. "What does he think happened in that meeting?" "He'll have made it into something it wasn't," Min-Jae said. "That's how he works. He takes a fact and bends it until it looks like something else." "What fact?" A pause. Brief but present. "Min-Jae, what fact?" "Vincent Parker has been seen with a woman twice in the past month," he said. "Not you. Someone connected to Seo Jin-ho's side of my organization. Seo Jin-ho will claim that the introduction I arranged pulled you into a situation I either didn't know about or orchestrated myself." She stared at him. "Is that true?" "No." "Did you know about the woman?" "Not when I arranged the introduction," he said. "I found out 3 days ago." She breathed through her nose. The cold went straight into her lungs. "3 days ago," she said. "Yes. And you didn't tell me." He said nothing. "You came to the practice wing tonight to tell me Seo Jin-ho was going to move," she said. "And you told me that. But you didn't tell me the part where the man you introduced me to is connected to your enemy through a woman you found out about 3 days ago." "The connection is not direct. Parker doesn't know about her involvement with Jin-ho." "That doesn't matter." Her voice was level, but it was costing her. "What matters is that you knew something that directly affected me and you chose what to tell me and what to leave out. That's not different from lying." He met her eyes. He didn't argue. She almost wished he had. "Go home," he said. "Don't respond to the text. I'll handle Jin-ho." "You'll handle Jin-ho," she repeated. "Yes. The way you handled telling me the complete truth." The muscle in his jaw moved once. "Naomi, I'm going home," she said. "Don't contact me tonight." She left. She walked back to the apartment without texting Priya and went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed in her coat for 20 minutes without taking it off. Priya knocked at 10:15. Naomi opened the door. Priya looked at her face and said, "Sit down and tell me." She told her. All of it. The text, the conversation on the steps, the thing Min-Jae had known and chosen not to say. Priya listened with her hands around her mug and her face doing the careful neutral thing that meant she was managing her own reaction in order to stay available for Naomi's. When she finished, Priya said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." "That's not true." "You know, you just don't like the options." Naomi pulled her coat off finally and dropped it on the chair. "The smart thing is to end the arrangement. Walk away. Let him find another tutor, fail the exam or pass it, and stop being a variable in something that has nothing to do with me." "That's the smart thing," Priya agreed. "But Seo Jin-ho already sent that text, which means walking away doesn't erase the story he's building. It just removes my ability to respond to it." Priya was quiet. "If I disappear, the narrative is whatever Jin-ho wants it to be," Naomi said. "A woman who got too close to something she didn't understand and got burned, or worse, depending on what he says, A woman who was used and then discarded. And if I stay, I'm inside something dangerous with a man who just demonstrated he filters information when he thinks it's for my benefit. Priya set her mug down. There's a third thing you haven't said. Naomi looked at the floor.
You're angry at him, Priya said.
But the anger is the kind you get when someone you trusted more than you realize does something that costs you.
I don't trust him.
You trusted him more than you realized, Priya said again, gently and without negotiation. Naomi didn't answer. She didn't sleep until 3. When she did sleep, it was the shallow, restless kind that left her more tired than she'd been before it. Seo Jin-ho arrived in her life in person 2 days later. She was in the campus cafe, the same one where she'd had the doorway conversation with Min-Jae weeks ago. She was working on her thesis and eating a sandwich she kept forgetting to finish when a man sat down across from her without being invited. He was in his mid-30s. Good suit. The kind of face that smiled often and meant it infrequently. He set a small envelope on the table between them, cream-colored, unsealed, and folded his hands and looked at her with the particular pleasantness of someone who has thought carefully about the power dynamic in the room. Miss Carter, he said, I've wanted to introduce myself. I'm a colleague of Min-Jae's. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. She did not touch the envelope. I don't know you, she said. Seo Jin-ho. We have mutual contacts through your arrangement with Min-Jae. He smiled. It was a practice smile, the kind assembled from the correct components. I wanted to speak with you before things became complicated. Things are already complicated, she said. You sent me a text from an unknown number. I wanted to get your attention. You got it. What do you want? He gestured toward the envelope. There's a figure in there, he said. A generous one. Consider it a consulting fee for your time, your discretion, and your decision to conclude your current arrangement with Min-Jae quietly and without drama. She looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she looked at him. You're paying me to leave, she said. I'm compensating you for understanding that you've wandered into something that doesn't involve you. By sending a text implying I'm involved in something inappropriate with a man I was introduced to through an academic contact. A misunderstanding, he said smoothly, easily corrected once the underlying situation resolves itself. The underlying situation being me. The underlying situation being an arrangement that creates instability, he said, and for just a moment the smooth pleasantness thinned, something harder underneath it. Min-Jae has a position to maintain. Associations that distract from that position create problems. You seem like an intelligent woman. I'm offering you an exit that benefits you. She put her sandwich down. She had a very specific feeling. Not fear, something more structural than fear. The sensation of understanding exactly where you are in a room and exactly what each exit costs. If I don't take the envelope, she said. He smiled again. I'd hate for the story about Vincent Parker to develop in the wrong direction. There is no story about Vincent Parker. There will be one, he said simply. Stories are easy to grow, especially about a young woman who pursued an introduction to a connected man through someone she was privately paid to be close to. The music department is small. Reputations are... He tilted his head. Delicate things. She breathed in and out. She kept her hands flat on the table. Take the evening to consider it, he said, standing. He straightened his jacket with the particular care of a man who treats every gesture like a statement. I'll expect your decision tomorrow. He left. The envelope sat on the table between her coffee and her score sheets. She didn't open it. She left it there and packed her bag and walked out of the cafe and called Min-Jae from the parking lot. He answered on the second ring. He sat down across from me in the campus cafe, she said. He put an envelope on the table and told me there's money in it if I end the arrangement quietly. He said if I don't take it, the story about Vincent Parker goes somewhere public. A silence on the line. It was a specific kind of silence, the kind that has weight and temperature. Where are you now? Min-Jae said. Parking lot outside the cafe. Stay there. I'm not staying anywhere. I'm telling you what happened because you need to know, and because I'm angry, and because I want you to understand that your associate sat across from me and threatened my academic reputation in very polite language, and I need to know right now whether you knew he was going to do that. No, he said. Certain. Certain, he said, and his voice had changed. Not louder, not more emotional, something colder and more precise, like a temperature dropping. Then fix it, she said, and don't filter what you tell me again. She ended the call. She stood in the parking lot until her hands stopped shaking, which took longer than she would have liked. The thing about the next 4 days was how quiet they were. Seo Jin-ho didn't text again. The envelope, which she'd left in the cafe, presumably got collected by someone. Min-Jae sent a single message. It's being handled. Session Thursday as scheduled if you're willing. She responded, I'll be there. She told herself the quiet meant it was resolved. She went to her thesis sessions. She had a second coffee with Vincent that she had agreed to before everything complicated, and it was fine. He was fine, the conversation was fine, and she spent the entire hour aware of the specific nothing she felt and what that meant, and she was not ready to look at what it meant yet, so she filed it with the other things. Thursday came. She went to the library. Min-Jae was there. He looked, if anything, worse than he had the week before. The controlled tiredness had deepened into something she could read now across the width of the table, a sustained cost he was paying for something he hadn't named. They worked for an hour on Stein's final chapter before practice exam materials. He performed well. Better than well, actually. She pushed him through 2 full practice scenarios, and he got both right. And on the second one, he found an approach she hadn't shown him, something he'd derived himself from the underlying logic, and she looked at his work on the legal pad and said, That's right. He looked up. That's not the method I taught you, she said. Where did that come from? I thought about what you said, that the formula is the result, not the process. I went back to the foundational logic. She looked at him for a moment. You've got this, she said. Stein's exam. You'll pass it. Something crossed his face, brief, unguarded, there and gone. Don't be certain yet, he said. I'm certain, she said. I've been teaching people for 3 years. I know when someone has it. He looked down at the legal pad. Thank you, he said. It was the first time he'd said it without it sounding like a transaction. She was aware of the shift. She told herself she wasn't. They were packing up at the end of the session when Min-Jae said without looking at her, Jin-ho has been removed from his position. She went still with her bag half-zipped. Meaning what, specifically, she said. Meaning he no longer has standing to affect anything connected to you, Min-Jae said. He was folding the legal pad, each motion precise. He overstepped in ways that went beyond you. You were the most visible element, but not the only one. What happened to him? He's been reassigned to functions that don't involve contact with anyone in my immediate operations. A pause. He won't come near you. She studied his profile. That's not the whole story. No, he said. It isn't. She waited. He had been skimming from operational accounts for 8 months, Min-Jae said. I knew something was wrong for 6. I didn't have complete evidence until last week. His move against you accelerated the timeline. She processed this. You used me, she said. Not an accusation, exactly, a statement that needed verification. No, he said. He looked at her then, directly. I was already building the case. What he did to you made me move faster than I planned, but I didn't put you in that position to provoke him. But you knew he might go after me. A silence. You knew, she said. I knew he was the type, Min-Jae said. I didn't know when or how directly. She zipped her bag. She did it slowly, and the sound of it was very loud in the quiet library. Every time I think I have the full picture, she said, there's another layer. Yes, he said. That's accurate. Is that what this world is? Just layers under layers of things people knew and didn't say. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said again. It is. She put her bag on her shoulder. She stood there for a moment looking at him. At the table between them, the used legal pad, the green textbook with its cracked spine from weeks of heavy use, the man across from it who had spent 6 weeks showing her something real between intervals of withholding something else. I need to think, she said. I know. Don't contact me until I do, he nodded. She walked to the library exit. The night security guard by the door gave her the nod he always gave her at closing time.
She pushed through the door into the December cold, and the wind hit her face, and she thought, this is where I should walk away. She knew it with the same clarity that she knew key signatures and tempo markings, the way a musician knows a piece has ended, the particular silence after the final note before the audience responds. She kept walking. She crossed the quad. She went home. She didn't tell Priya she was back. Priya's light was off. She sat at her keyboard in the dark apartment and didn't turn the lights on and sat with her hands in her lap for a long time. Then she started to play. Not the thesis piece. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. What happened the following Saturday was not something she had planned for. Min-Jae's residence was a private home 40 minutes from campus, and she had been there before. 3 of their early sessions had been there before she'd insisted on moving to the library, citing the neutrality of the space, though the real reason was that his home was too much of a place where a person actually lived, and she hadn't been ready for that information about him. She went there because he had sent a message 3 days after their library conversation that said only, Stein exam Monday. Final session Saturday, if you're available. My residence? The library is closed for the weekend. She had responded, Saturday at 6. The residence was in a neighborhood where the houses didn't advertise themselves. No gates with monograms. No obvious security visible from the street. Just a house that was too well maintained to be accidental and too large to pretend it was ordinary. The man who answered the door was not one of the usual 2. Older, quieter, someone who'd been in service long enough to have stopped being curious about anything. Min-Jae was in the main study. It was a room she'd been in twice before. Bookshelves that were actually used, a desk that was actually worked at, a secondary table they'd moved to for tutoring because the desk was covered in things he was apparently mid-process on. He was standing when she came in, looking at something on the desk, and he turned when she entered, and there was a moment, brief and ordinary, where they simply looked at each other across the room with no particular agenda. Stein Monday, she said. Stein Monday, he agreed. They worked for 2 hours. He was ready. She could see it in everything, the pattern recognition, the speed, the way he self-corrected twice without her prompting. She ran him through a full mock scenario, Stein's format exactly, and he completed it in the allotted time and got everything right. She set the pencil down. You're done, she said. He looked at the mock paper. You're sure? I've been sure for a week. This confirms it. He sat back. The study was warm. The first genuinely warm room she'd been in weeks, it felt like. Outside the windows, the December dark was complete. Something in her body released a tension she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped identifying it as tension. What happens now? He said. With our arrangement. She looked at the table. You pass Monday, the arrangement concludes. That was the structure. The structure, he said. Yes. And the other part. Parker. She was quiet for a moment. It concluded on its own, she said. That's not something I'm holding you to. He studied her. What does that mean? It means I had coffee with him twice, and he's a genuinely interesting person, and I feel approximately nothing, she said, which tells me the thing I wanted from that situation wasn't actually Vincent Parker. The room was very quiet. The heat moved through it. What was it? He said. She looked at him. I think I wanted proof that I was capable of wanting something normal, she said. Something that didn't scare me. He was watching her with the careful, complete attention that she had spent 6 weeks cataloging and still couldn't fully decode. And me, he said quietly, do I scare you? She opened her mouth to say something, she didn't know what, something that would have been true and manageable and not too much. When a door opened somewhere in the house, a staff member appeared at the study entrance and said something briefly in Korean. Min-Jae's expression shifted, a small involuntary tightening, and he responded in the same language, and the staff member withdrew. What? She said. One of the senior men in my father's network is here, he said. Unannounced. He doesn't make unannounced visits unless... He stopped. He reached for his phone. He read something on the screen and went completely still. Min-Jae. He looked up from the phone. His face had gone to stone. Not the controlled, managed stillness she'd learned to read, but something deeper,
something that had gone below the surface of what he usually showed anyone. "My father is calling a review of my operational standing," he said. "Tonight. He sent a formal representative." She stared at him. "Can he do that?" "He can always do that. I've kept him at a distance for 3 years. Something—" He stopped, looked at the phone. "Something gave him grounds." A silence. "What grounds?" she said. He set the phone face down on the table. He looked at her across the tutoring materials, the mock exam, the weeks of sessions, and the worn pages of the legal pad. He looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they've been trying to protect and have just failed to protect. "Someone sent my father documentation," he said, "of our arrangement. Everything, the tutoring, the Parker introduction, the nature of the exchange, framed to suggest that I've been compromised, that I've allowed personal involvement to affect my judgment in a way that creates risk for the organization's assets." She felt the floor of the moment drop out. "Jin-ho," she said. "Before I removed him," Min-Jae said. "He sent it before. Insurance." She sat with that. The heat of the room, which had felt comforting 20 minutes ago, now felt like something else entirely. She thought about the envelope in the cafe. She thought about every layer under every layer. She thought about how precisely, how efficiently, a man with enough foresight could build a trap out of pieces that looked like separate events until you stepped back and saw the shape of the whole thing. She thought about what happened now. To Min-Jae's standing, to the academic requirement, to the 3 years he'd spent maintaining distance from his father's control. She thought about her own name in that documentation, written in whatever framing Jin-ho had chosen, sent to a man she'd never met, who now had her existence as evidence in an argument about his son's fitness. She thought about the question Min-Jae had been about to answer before the door opened. "Do I scare you?" She looked at him across the table. He was holding himself the way he always held himself. Controlled, precise, the body language of a man who had learned before he could fully articulate it that losing composure in front of anyone was a form of surrender. But underneath it, in the slight change in his breathing, in the way his hands were too flat on the table, she could see what it was costing him. She had a choice. She had always had a choice. In theory, but this was the first time it felt completely real. Not a tactical decision about an arrangement, not a calculation about risk versus benefit, but the raw and immediate choice about who she was going to be in the next 30 seconds. She picked up her pencil. She turned to a clean page of his legal pad. She said, "Tell me what your father's review requires you to demonstrate." He stared at her. "You have the exam Monday," she said. "You also apparently have tonight. Tell me what the review requires, and we'll figure out which problems we can actually solve before morning." The silence lasted long enough that she could hear the heat moving through the vents and the faint sound of voices somewhere else in the house. "Naomi," he said. "Tell me what the review requires," she said. He told her. And somewhere in the course of that night, between the documentation his father had received and the exam waiting on Monday and the knock that would come at the study door in 40 minutes, summoning Min-Jae to a conversation she would not be present for, something shifted between them that could not be undone. Not by walking away, not by ending the arrangement, not by any of the clean exits she had been keeping carefully mapped since the first night she sat down across from him in the library. She understood it the way she understood music, not as a decision she had made, but as a key change she had already moved through before she noticed the melody had changed. The knock came at 43 minutes past 9. Naomi heard it from inside the study. 3 controlled strikes against the door, the sound of someone who had rehearsed the gesture. Min-Jae stood from the table with the particular economy of movement she'd learned to read as him managing something internal. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the legal pad on the table, at the notes she'd been taking while he walked her through his father's review requirements, and something moved across his face, something between recognition and the specific sorrow of a man who can see the shape of what he's about to walk into. "Stay here," he said. "How long?" "I don't know." He went to the door. She watched him become, in the 10 feet between the table and the threshold, the version of himself that the world outside this room knew. The shoulders settled differently, the face closed. By the time he opened the door, he was Kang Min-Jae in the complete sense, the one that made people step back, that made rooms adjust their temperature. She sat at the table and listened to voices move through the house. Korean mostly, with intervals of English that she couldn't track from this distance. A deeper voice she hadn't heard before. Older, the cadence of someone who spoke slowly because they had never needed to rush. That would be the father's representative. She could hear the shape of a man who had been delivering verdicts for decades. She looked at the legal pad. She looked at what she'd written down in the past hour. The structure of Kang Min-Jae's operational standing, the requirements of the review, the specific accusations that Jin-Ho's documentation had framed around the tutoring arrangement and the Parker introduction. She looked at how thin the actual charges were when you stripped the framing away. What remained was the fact of her, a woman his father's network didn't recognize, whose presence in his life they couldn't categorize, whose value they had no mechanism to assess. She was the variable that didn't compute. She picked up his textbook. She turned to the chapter she knew best from months of teaching it, and she read it not because she needed to, but because her hands required occupation, while the rest of her sat inside the deep specific tension of waiting in someone else's crisis. The voices moved. At one point there was a silence that lasted long enough to feel deliberate. Then the deeper voice resumed, slower now, more formal, the rhythm of something being dictated rather than discussed. She checked her phone. Priya had texted at 8:15. "You still at the session?" She hadn't responded. She typed, "Still here. Long session. Don't wait up." She stared at the message for a moment, aware of everything it wasn't saying, then sent it. At 11:18, the study door opened. Min-Jae came back in. He closed the door behind him and stood with his hand still on the handle and his back to the room for a moment, and she saw in that single unguarded second what the conversation had cost him: the set of his spine, the way he was breathing, the slight downward angle of his head that was not defeat but was adjacent to it. He turned around. His face was controlled again, but the control was newer, fresher, the way a wound looks when it's just been closed. "What happened?" she said. He moved to the chair across from her and sat down. He didn't pick up the legal pad. He put his hands on the table and looked at them. "My father is initiating a formal review of my operational authority," he said. "The representative has given me a 2-week window to demonstrate fitness. The criteria include financial documentation, an assessment from 3 senior members of my network, and—" He stopped. "And?" "A personal meeting," he said. "My father wants to meet me in person, in Seoul, within the 2-week window." Naomi looked at him. "When was the last time you were in Seoul?" 3 years ago, when I relocated to establish independent operations here. We agreed at that time that the distance would be—" He stopped again. His jaw moved. "He called it a trial period. I called it something else." "What did you call it?" "Leaving," he said. The word landed in the room and sat there. She didn't try to move it. "The exam is Monday," she said. "Yes." "Pass the exam. That's the academic standing documentation right there. It closes one part of the review criteria." She pulled the legal pad toward herself. "The financial documentation. You said you have 2 weeks, which means you have time to compile it properly, and that's your territory. You can do that." "The senior member assessments are the problem," he said. 2 of the 3 I'd need are currently in positions complicated by Jin-Ho's removal. He had relationships with them. My removing him created friction." "How much friction?" "Enough that one of them declined the assessment request already." She wrote this down. She didn't know why she wrote it down. It wasn't something she could solve, but the act of writing gave the problem a shape outside her head. "And the meeting with your father," she said. He was quiet for a long time. "He has never come to me," Min-Jae said. "In 31 years. I have always gone to him. Every review, every assessment, every demonstration of adequacy. I have always been the one to travel." He looked at his hands. "The meeting in Seoul is not a conversation. It's a summons. It's what it has always been." She looked at him across the table. There was nothing tactical to say, no framework she could build around this particular thing. "What do you want to do?" she said. "What I want?" he said, and the way he said it made clear that want was a category he rarely accessed, "is to pass the exam Monday, compile the documentation, secure 2 of the 3 assessments, and go to Seoul with something to show him that isn't just survival, something that's actually mine. The independent operations. The degree," he said. If I complete the requirement, if I finish the academic standing, it's the one thing in my life that his money didn't build, his network didn't open, his name didn't guarantee. His voice was flat, but underneath it she could hear the thing he'd been carrying, the weight of a man trying to build one thing that was entirely his own in a life where almost everything had been constructed by someone else's design. One thing, he said. She understood this the way she understood it about herself. The composition thesis, the years of working inside a discipline that had cost her sleep and relationships and certainty, the choice at 7 years old that had become her own before she was old enough to fully claim it. She understood what it meant to need something to be yours. Then that's what we do, she said. He looked at her. Not with the controlled evaluation she'd cataloged over months, but with something raw and unprocessed and entirely undefended. You should go home, he said. This isn't your problem. I know it isn't. Naomi, I know, she said more firmly. I know it isn't my problem. I know the arrangement is technically concluded pending Monday's exam. I know all of that. She kept her eyes on his. I'm still here. The heat moved through the room. Somewhere outside, the December wind had picked up. She could hear it faintly against the windows. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached for the legal pad and the pen, and he said, Monday's exam first. And she said, Monday's exam first. And they worked until 1 in the morning. Monday came the way exam days always come, with the particular flat light of a morning that has no patience for preparation you didn't finish. Naomi knew from experience that there was nothing useful to do for someone on exam morning except leave them alone. So she texted Min-Jae at 7. You have it. Go. He didn't respond, which was correct. She went to her own studio session. She worked on the third movement for 3 hours, and for the first time in weeks it moved. Not easily. Music never moved easily, but with direction. The melody finding its resolution in a way that had been eluding her since October. She played through it twice and sat at the keyboard afterward with her hands in her lap and understood that the thing that had been missing wasn't a technical solution. It had been something she'd needed to feel before she could write it. She didn't examine what that meant too precisely. She played it a third time and recorded it on her phone. Min-Jae texted at 2:17 p.m. 3 words. Exam is done. She stared at her phone. She typed, How do you feel? She deleted it and typed, How did it go? She deleted that too. She typed, Good. She sent that. He responded, Come to the house tonight if you're free. She was free. She didn't tell him immediately. She waited 20 minutes and then said, 7 o'clock. When she arrived, something in the house had changed. She couldn't identify it precisely. The same man answered the door, the same study was lit at the end of the hall, but there was a different quality to the silence, less compressed, as if something that had been held under pressure had been partially released. Min-Jae was standing when she came in. He was in the same clothes he'd worn to the exam, dress shirt, dark trousers, jacket on the back of the chair, and he looked like a man who had come through something and hadn't fully processed the fact of being through it yet. You passed, she said. She didn't make it a question. I passed, he said. She exhaled. She hadn't known she'd been holding something until she let it go. Tell me. 78, he said. Stein's curve puts that in the passing threshold with margin. The section on interest rate policy and inflation targeting. He paused, something crossing his face that was close to the thing he never quite allowed himself. I completed it first. I knew it completely. Because you derived the logic, she said, not the formula. Because you showed me the difference, he said. The room was warm. She looked at the table where they'd worked for months. The scuffed surface, the legal pad she'd filled a dozen pages of, the green textbook with its broken spine. She thought about the first Friday she'd walked in 4 minutes late on purpose, the careful architecture of her position, the terms she'd laid out like a perimeter fence. She thought about how none of it had worked the way she planned and how that was, at this specific moment, standing in the warm light of his study with the exam behind them and soul still ahead, something she couldn't call a bad thing. The review, she said. He moved to the desk. I've been compiling the financial documentation all day. I have 2 assessments secured. I called the 3rd senior member directly, and told him Jin-Ho's removal was a correction, not a disruption. He understood the distinction. He'll submit. All three. All three. The Seoul meeting. A pause. He turned from the desk and looked at her. I leave Friday. 4 days. She did the calculation without meaning to. The exam today, Seoul Friday, the 2-week review window, the specific and unresolvable fact that his father now knew something about his life that Min-Jae had never intended to hand him. He knows about me, she said, from Jin-Ho's documentation. Yes. What does he know? That you're a music student. That I arranged a tutoring exchange that included a social introduction. That we've been meeting regularly. He paused. The framing Jin-Ho gave it is what he knows. I haven't been able to correct the framing yet. Because you'd have to explain what it actually was. Because I'd have to explain what it actually is, he said. The small word. Present tense. She looked at the window. Outside, the December dark was total. No stars visible, the cloud cover thick and low. She could see her own faint reflection in the glass, layered over the dark outside, and behind her the lit room and Min-Jae standing in it. What will you tell him? She said. The truth, he said. For the first time in 31 years, probably. She turned back from the window. He was watching her with the same open, undefended look she'd seen the night of the review summons. The version of him that existed below the management, below the control, the person he apparently only became in this room when it was very late, and the pressure had been on long enough that the architecture gave way. She took a step toward him. She didn't plan it. Her body made the decision before her brain finished the sentence she'd been constructing. Min-Jae, she said. Don't, he said. She stopped. Don't say something that's about tonight, he said. About the exam or the review or the fact that you stayed. His voice was low and precise, and she could hear underneath it the cost of saying this, the specific cost of a man who had learned to want nothing he might not be able to keep. If you say something true. She stood 3 feet from him in the warm study. I'm scared, she said. He nodded slowly. Of what? Of the same thing I've been scared of since I was 17 years old, she said. Of being inside something real and having it taken apart. She breathed. Of trusting someone the way you have to trust someone when it's not an arrangement anymore, and then finding out that the trust was the mistake. He was quiet. He didn't try to reassure her. She'd noticed this about him months ago. He didn't offer comfort that wasn't honest. It had annoyed her then. It didn't annoy her now. I'm scared of the same thing, he said. She looked at him. You. I have been afraid my entire life, he said, of becoming someone whose choices are made by his fear. My father's expectations, my organization's requirements, Jin-Ho's manipulation. Every decision I've made in 3 years has been partly in response to what someone else required of me. He paused. You are the first thing in 3 years that I chose for no reason that had anything to do with anyone else. She felt the weight of it. Not romantically, not the way movies build to a moment like this, all soft lighting and strings. It felt like something structural, like a load-bearing wall being identified. I have a performance, she said. End of the semester showcase. I've been composing the piece for 8 months and I'm almost done. She paused. It's the most personal thing I've ever written. I've been terrified to finish it because finishing it means performing. It means putting it in front of people and it's mine, she said, completely. And I'm terrified of what it means if I put something completely mine in front of people and they... She stopped. And they see it, he said. Yes. He crossed the 3 feet of space between them. He didn't touch her. He stood close enough that she could see the precise dark of his eyes and the exhaustion underneath the control, and the something else underneath, that which had been there for months, and which she had been cataloging without letting herself name. Finish it, he said. I'm working on it. Finish it, he said again, and perform it, and I will be there. She looked at him. You might be in Seoul. I'll be back. You don't know that. No, he said. I don't. The honesty of it hit her harder than certainty would have.
She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. Not a gesture she'd planned, not a thing she'd prepared, just her hand against the line of his face, and she felt him go very still under her touch, the way a person goes still when they're trying not to frighten something they've been waiting a long time for. "Go to Seoul," she said. "Tell your father the truth. Come back." He turned his face slightly into her hand, just slightly. A millimeter's movement barely visible, the most undefended thing she'd seen him do. "Naomi," he said. "I know," she said. "I know." She lowered her hand. She stepped back. She picked up her bag from the chair, and he let her, because he understood the same thing she understood, that tonight was not the night for more than this, that they were both still standing in the rubble of 6 weeks of controlled distance, and what came next needed to be built more carefully than the thing they'd taken apart. She went home. She sat at the keyboard until 3 in the morning and finished the third movement completely and started the fourth, and the music came the way it comes when you've stopped fighting the truth of what you're writing. Soul happened the way impossible things happen, suddenly and with finality. Min-Jae left Friday. He sent her a single text at 4 a.m. from the airport. She saw it when she woke at 7. The exam certificate goes to Stein's office Monday morning. Don't let them lose it. She almost smiled. She texted back, "Come back." He didn't respond. The next 9 days were the longest she'd had since moving to this city. She finished the composition. All 4 movements, the fourth resolving in a way that surprised her, not the triumphant ending she'd planned since September, but something quieter and more certain, a melody that understood what it was without needing to announce it. She played it through twice, recorded it, sent the recording to Professor Ellison with a note that said she was ready to schedule the showcase performance. Ellison responded within an hour. "This is it, Naomi. This is the one." She sat with that for a long time. Priya found her in the kitchen at noon, staring at her phone with the specific expression of someone who has received good news and doesn't know what to do with it without someone to tell. "Play it for me," Priya said. She played it, all the way through. Priya sat on the couch and listened with her eyes closed, and when it finished she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Who is this piece about?" "It's about me," Naomi said. Priya opened her eyes. And someone who waited," Naomi said. Priya looked at her with the measured care of someone who has been watching something develop for months and has been patient enough to let it arrive on its own. "Have you heard from him?" Priya said. "Brief texts. He's in the meetings." "How are the meetings going?" "I don't know. He doesn't say much. He says things like documentation submitted and assessment received. He doesn't say how they're going." "That sounds like him." "Yes," Naomi said. "It does." The showcase was scheduled for the last Friday of the semester, 8 days away. She rehearsed every day, not obsessively, but with the focused intention of someone who has decided to trust the work. She rehearsed until the piece lived in her hands completely, until she could play it in any emotional state and it remained true. On the 5th day of Min-Jae's absence, he called instead of texting. She answered on the 2nd ring. "How is it going?" she said. He listened. A pause on the line, the faint distance of international connection. For the first time in my life, my father sat across from me and listened without deciding what I was going to say before I finished saying it. She sat down on the edge of her bed. "What changed?" "I don't know exactly. He's older, I think." He stopped. "I think he's been waiting for me to come back and say something true for 3 years, and I kept sending reports instead." "What did you say?" "I told him about the degree, the exam, what it meant to build something that was mine." A pause. "I told him about the arrangement and what it had become." Her breath went shallow. "What did he say?" "He asked what kind of music you write." Another pause. "I told him extended orchestral form with non-Western harmonic influence." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Does she play for herself or for audiences?" I said both. He said, "Then she's serious about it." And then he didn't say anything else about you, but something in the room changed. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. "When are you coming back?" "The review concludes tomorrow. I'll fly out Thursday morning." Thursday. 1 day before the showcase, she did the math. "You'll land
Late Thursday, he said. I know about the showcase Friday. I didn't tell you the date. Priya texted me 3 days ago. She almost laughed. She pressed the sound back. Of course she did. Naomi. His voice had shifted, lower, quieter, the way it sounded in the study at 1 a.m. when the control had eased. I'll be there Friday. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. She breathed. Okay. Okay, he said. The line stayed open for a moment, neither of them speaking, just the faint presence of the connection, the distance between a city she was in and a city he was in, and the specific weight of everything that had been built in the months between their first collision in a university corridor and this phone call at 11 at night in December. Go sleep, she said. You have a flight Thursday. You go sleep, he said. You have a performance Friday. She smiled. She felt it in her whole face, which almost never happened. Good night, Min-Jae. Good night, he said. She lay back on her bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, something that wasn't architecture. Something that didn't have walls. Thursday came. He texted at 6 a.m. her time. Boarding. She was already awake. She spent Thursday in final rehearsal, one full run-through in the morning, a shorter one in the afternoon to settle her hands, and then she stopped and ate dinner with Priya, and they talked about everything except the performance and Min-Jae, which meant they talked about him twice in subtext and both understood it perfectly. At 10:15 p.m., she got a text. Landed, delayed on ground, going to the house. She typed back, sleep. He sent back a single character, a period. She took it as agreement. She tried to sleep. She played the fourth movement in her head without the piano, listening to the internal music the way she'd learned to in her first year of serious study. The composition existing entirely in the mind, true and complete without the instrument. It was there. It was right. She slept. Friday morning arrived cold and clear, the December sky stripped to a hard blue by overnight wind. She dressed carefully, not for appearance but for performance, the physical ritual of preparation that her body understood as signal. She ate. She warmed her hands. She ran scales for 30 minutes, not because she needed to, but because scales were the clearest language her hands knew, and she needed clarity. Priya drove her to the performance hall at 4 o'clock. The showcase started at 7. There were 6 performers. She was 4th. She had 3 hours. She used them. At 6:45, standing in the backstage corridor, in the hall that smelled of old wood and rosin and the particular electricity of a space filling with audience, she checked her phone. No text from Min-Jae. She put her phone away. She breathed through the cold knot in her sternum, the one that lived there before every performance, the one she'd learned to treat as signal rather than warning. The first 3 performers went. She listened from the wings. Good work. Serious work. The kind of program that made her proud to be in the same department. At 7:58, she walked to the side of the stage and looked out into the hall. The seats were full. The audience was that specific pre-performance quiet, expectant, contained. Faculty in the front section, students and guests behind. Professor Ellison in the 3rd row. A few faces she recognized from the program. Priya in the 7th row, center, who had saved the seat beside her with her coat. The seat beside Priya was empty. She looked at it for 3 seconds. She looked at the door at the back of the hall. Then the stage manager said her name and she walked out. The piano was a Steinway Concert Grand, the hall's best instrument, and she sat down at it and the bench height was right, and the keys were cool under her hands, and she looked out at the audience and every face in the room disappeared into the general dark, the way it always did from a lit stage. She adjusted the bench, she placed her hands, she took one breath. She looked at the door at the back of the hall. It opened. He came in fast, still in his travel clothes. Dark coat, the exhaustion of a transatlantic flight visible from 20 yards. And he stopped just inside the door, scanning the room, and Priya stood up from her seat and waved once with her whole arm. And he moved toward her and sat down in the empty seat just as Naomi watched him settle, and Priya pulled her coat from between them with the efficiency of someone who had planned this precisely. He looked at the stage. He found her. She was already looking at him. He gave her nothing with his face, no gesture, no nod,
Just the same steady, complete attention across the length of the concert hall, the same quality of seeing that she'd been learning to read for months, and had only recently understood was the most honest thing about him. She put her hands on the keys, and she played. The first movement came out exactly as she'd written it, precise, a little guarded, the melody introducing itself carefully, establishing its territory before trusting the room. The audience was with it. She could feel that without looking. The second movement opened up, broader, with the Korean pentatonic elements woven through the harmonic structure in a way that surprised even her when she heard it in the room rather than in her head. The third movement was the one she'd finished the night of the study session, the night of the review summons, the night she'd understood something about herself without being ready to name it. It came out true. Every bar of it came out true. She moved into the fourth. The fourth was the one she'd finished alone at 3 in the morning when Min-Jae was somewhere in the air between Seoul and here. The one that resolved not triumphantly, but with the quiet certainty of something that understood what it was. She played through the first section and the second and arrived at the final passage, the one she'd been reaching toward for 8 months. She played it. The last note rang through the hall, and she held it. Let the sustain pedal carry it through the room, through the air, until it faded to the particular silence that only exists after music has fully ended. The room held its breath. Then it breathed. The applause started, and she lifted her hands from the keys, and she looked out into the dark and found the 7th row, and found Min-Jae, who was not applauding because he wasn't looking at her the way an audience looks at a performer. He was looking at her the way someone looks when they have heard something they weren't sure existed until it was directly in front of them. She stood. She bowed. She walked off stage. She stood in the backstage corridor with her heart going hard in her chest and her hand shaking now that it was over. The performance shake, the body releasing what it had been holding, and she pressed her back against the cold wall and breathed. Professor Ellison appeared first, said something she mostly heard, squeezed her shoulder. Others followed, the brief flood of backstage aftermath. She moved through it, said what needed to be said, accepted what was offered. Then the corridor cleared, and Min-Jae was standing at the end of it. She looked at him. He looked at her. 40 feet of empty corridor and the sound of the next performer beginning somewhere on the other side of the wall. She walked toward him. He walked toward her. They met somewhere in the middle, which seemed right, and she stopped an arm's length away and looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and his face was the most open she had ever seen it. The management gone, the control somewhere else entirely, nothing between what was happening in him and the air between them. "You made it," she said. "I said I would," he said. "You were cutting it close." "Flight delay," he said. "I ran from the car." She looked at his coat. He was still wearing it. He had come in still wearing it because he hadn't had time to be anywhere but here. "Min-Jae," she said. "Naomi," he said. And then neither of them said anything for a moment, because there wasn't a thing that needed to be said yet, and they had both spent enough of their lives filling silences with things that weren't the real thing that they understood, without negotiating it, how to let this one be. His hand came up, found her face the way her hand had found his in the study, deliberate and careful and entirely unplanned. His thumb traced the line of her cheek, and his eyes didn't leave hers, and the backstage corridor held still around them. "The 4th movement," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "It was about—" "Yes," she said. He exhaled. It was the most human sound she'd heard from him in 5 months. She stepped forward, and his arm came around her, and she pressed her face against the cold wool of his coat and stood there, in the backstage corridor of a concert hall, while the 6th performance rang through the walls, inside something that had no arrangement attached to it, and no terms and no arranged exit. Just this. Just the two of them, choosing it. Outside, in the front row of the audience, Min-Jae's phone lit up with a message from a Seoul number, his father's private line. 3 words in Korean that translated, roughly, to "tell me more." He didn't see it. For the first time in 31 years, Kang Min-Jae was not watching for what came next. And somewhere in the accounting of everything he'd built and protected and feared losing, that was the first thing that had ever been entirely, completely his. This moment, this woman,
This choice made with nothing to prove and everything at stake. But in the morning, the phone would still be there, and Seoul would still need an answer. And the men in his network who had watched Jin-ho's removal with careful eyes would be watching what happened next with equal care. And Naomi would wake up and understand, in the full daylight of a Saturday in December, that the world they'd stepped into together was not the world she'd been living in before the corridor, the coffee, the doorway collision that started all of it. The morning would bring what it brought. But the morning had not come yet. The morning came the way she'd known it would, without ceremony, without the softness of transition. Just light through the gap in the curtains, and the sound of the city assembling itself outside, and the weight of everything that was still true in the daytime. Naomi woke in her own bed. She had come home at midnight, after the showcase reception, after Priya had hugged her in the lobby and said nothing except, "I'll be up," and then had the wisdom to go to sleep before Naomi got back. She had walked in and gone straight to her keyboard and sat there without playing, and then gone to bed and lain there until sleep took her somewhere around 2. She woke at 7 and picked up her phone. The text from Min-Jae had come at 6:40. "My father called last night, after the performance. We need to talk today when you're ready." She read it 3 times. Then she got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug and let the 7 words, "We need to talk today when you're ready," settle into her. Priya appeared at 7:30, looked at her face, and sat down. "Tell me," Priya said. "I don't know yet," Naomi said. "His father called last night. After the performance." "Yes." Priya poured her own coffee. She sat with it. She didn't offer interpretations, which was the most useful thing she could have done. "Whatever he says today," Priya said eventually, "you already did the thing." "What thing?" "You finished the piece. You performed it, in front of a full room, completely exposed, nothing protecting you." Priya looked at her steadily. "Whatever else happens, you did that. That part is already yours." Naomi looked at her mug. "I know. I just wanted to say it out loud," Priya said, "in case today gets loud." They drank their coffee. Outside, the December Saturday was pale and cold and entirely indifferent to the weight of what was moving through it. She texted Min-Jae at 9. "Ready when you are. Come here if that's easier." He arrived at 10:15. He knocked rather than ringing the bell, which was how she knew he understood that this was her space and that he was entering it with awareness. She opened the door. He was in different clothes than the night before. He'd gone home, changed, but the transatlantic exhaustion was still on him, the kind that sleep can reduce but not erase in a single night. He looked at her. She looked at him. The corridor between them was not the concert hall. There were no acoustics, no distance, no performance-shaped frame to hold them apart. "Come in," she said. She made him coffee without asking whether he wanted it. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table she'd been sitting at for the past 2 hours, and she set the mug in front of him and sat across from him and waited. He put his hands around the mug. He looked at it. "My father saw the showcase program," he said. "Someone photographed it and sent it to him. Your name, the piece title, the program notes." A pause. "He read your program notes." She had written 2 paragraphs for the showcase program. Professional information, composition intent, the harmonic framework she'd used. She'd written them 3 weeks ago and had not thought about them since. "What did he say?" she said. "He called me while I was in the corridor after I found you." He looked up. "I didn't see it until I got home last night. I called him back at midnight Seoul time." "And?" He set the mug down. "He asked me if I'd been honest with him in Seoul. I said yes." He was quiet for a long time. "My father uses silence the way other people use words. He always has." Then he asked if you knew what you'd stepped into. She breathed slowly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you walked into it with your eyes open and that you'd made every decision freely and that the only reason our arrangement had developed into anything beyond its original terms was because you refused to be managed." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. The almost smile, the one she'd been cataloging since October. He was quiet again. Then he said, "She sounds like your grandmother." Naomi looked at him. "Is that good?" "My grandmother," Min-Jae said,
was the only person my father has ever admitted to being afraid of. He paused. Yes, it's good. She sat with that for a moment. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator made its low hum. The apartment held its ordinary Saturday morning sounds around this conversation that was anything but ordinary. What does the review decision look like? She said. He's not withdrawing the review, Min-Jae said. He told me last night that the review stands, 2 more weeks of assessment period, but he also said something he's never said to me before. He stopped. His hands moved slightly on the table, a small gesture she'd learned to read as him finding his way through language that was unfamiliar territory. He said, "You've been building something. I want to see what it is." She stared at him. "That's different from what you described." "Yes," he said. "It is." "What changed?" He looked at her directly. "I don't know completely. I think—" He stopped again. "Started differently. In Seoul, I showed him the exam result, the academic certificate. He looked at it for a long time and then he said, 'Why does this matter to you?' And I told him the truth, that I needed one thing in my life that I built without his name opening the door. He didn't respond, but when I was leaving, he said, 'Your mother would have appreciated that.'" The room was very quiet. "Your mother," she said carefully. "She died when I was 9, he said. My father has said her name to me 4 times in 22 years. That was the 5th. He looked at the coffee mug. He's not a man who changes, but I think something in him, some very small thing, shifted in that meeting. I don't know what to do with it yet." "You don't have to do anything with it yet," she said. He looked up. "It's new," she said. "You let it be new. You don't have to have a framework for it in the first 48 hours. He studied her. "Is that what you do?" "With new things." She thought about the composition, the months of fighting the 4th movement, the night she'd stopped fighting it. "No," she said. "I usually try to manage it immediately and then exhaust myself and then eventually let it be what it is, but I'm working on the other way." The corner of his mouth again, more than usual this time. She looked at it and looked away. "There's something else," he said. She stilled. "Jin-ho," he said. "The documentation he sent my father. My father read it, all of it." He paused. "There was a section that I wasn't expecting. He'd done research on you. Jin-ho had, before he sent the package to Seoul." She felt the cold settle into her, the specific cold that comes from understanding that you've been observed without knowing it. "What kind of research?" she said. "Background." Min-Jae's voice was careful. "Academic records? Personal history? He found—" He stopped, looked at her with an attention that was not clinical, not evaluating, just present. "He found information about what happened to you in high school, your hometown, why you left." The kitchen tilted very slightly. She hadn't spoken about this to anyone outside of the specific conversation she was thinking of right now. The one she hadn't had yet. The one she'd been carrying the components of since she was 17 years old. She had told pieces of it to Priya over 3 years, not all at once, not directly, but enough that Priya had the shape of it without all the details. She had told no one the full version. "He put it in the documentation," she said. Her voice came out flat. "Yes." "And your father read it?" "Yes." She put her hands flat on the table. She looked at them. She breathed through the tightening in her sternum, the specific physical response her body had to this topic that she'd learned to manage but never to fully stop. "What did your father do with it?" she said. "He told me," Min-Jae said, "that Jin-ho had included it to imply that you were emotionally unstable, that your past made you a liability." He paused. "My father's response was that a man who weaponizes a woman's history of surviving harm is not someone he wants in his network. He made a call to Seoul yesterday evening. Jin-ho's remaining connections in my father's organization have been severed." She absorbed this. The cold in her sternum shifted. Not gone, but different. The specific cold of being seen without consenting to it, sitting alongside the unexpected warmth of what had been done with what was seen. "Your father doesn't know me," she said. "No." "He made that decision based on principle, not on me specifically." "Yes," Min-Jae said. But also, he stopped. He looked at her with the open, careful attention that had stopped being unfamiliar weeks ago. I told him, in Seoul, not the details, but I told him that what happened to you was real and that you'd carried it longer than anyone should carry something alone, and that the fact of it had nothing to do with stability and everything to do with survival. A pause. He listened. He didn't comment, but he listened. She looked at the table. She pressed her fingertips against the wood grain and felt the texture of it under her skin and breathed through the thing that was happening in her chest. Not crying. She wasn't going to cry, but the specific pressure of something that has been held for a very long time being acknowledged by the world for the first time. You told him, she said. Yes. Without asking me. A silence. Yes, he said. I should have asked you. I didn't. I'm telling you now because you deserve to know and because... He stopped. Because not telling you would be the same thing I did with the Parker information, and I told you I wouldn't do that again. She looked up. He met her eyes. He held them with the steadiness that was, she had come to understand, his version of showing everything, that absolute, unmoving, deliberate attention that meant he was not performing composure, but simply being present with nothing between himself and whatever was in front of him. Okay, she said. I should have asked. I heard you. Okay, she breathed. I'm not angry. She stopped. She pressed her fingers harder against the table. No one has ever defended that part of my history to someone important to them before. Not like that, not... She stopped again. I know, he said quietly. I know that. They sat with it.
The kitchen held them. The Saturday morning outside moved through itself. Distant traffic, someone's dog, the unremarkable sounds of a world that didn't know what was happening at this table. I need to tell Priya, Naomi said finally. The full version. I've been giving her pieces for 3 years and she's been patient with the pieces, but she deserves the whole thing. She looked at her hands. I've been afraid that if I say all of it at once, it becomes more real than I can hold. It's already real, Min-Jae said. It's been real. You've just been holding it alone. I know. She looked at him. That's what I'm saying. I think I'm ready to stop doing that. Something in his face shifted. The very subtle version of what she'd seen the night before in the corridor. The most undefended version of him. The one that existed below everything he'd built to survive his own life. Good, he said, with a quietness that held more in it than the word usually carries. She called Priya into the kitchen 20 minutes later, after Min-Jae had gone into the living room to make the calls he needed to make. Network contacts, documentation follow-up, the ongoing machinery of a life that didn't stop because Saturday had arrived. Naomi sat at the table and Priya came in and looked at her face and sat down. I'm going to tell you something, Naomi said. Okay, Priya said. All of it, not the pieces. Priya put her phone face down on the table. She folded her hands. She gave Naomi the complete, undivided attention that was, for a woman who processed the world through observation and information, the greatest act of care she knew how to perform. And Naomi told her. It took 40 minutes. It was not linear. It moved in the way real things move when they've been stored out of order for years, the chronology reassembling itself as she spoke. Priya did not interrupt. She did not reach across the table. She sat with her hands folded and her eyes on Naomi's face and let the room hold what it needed to hold. When Naomi finished, the kitchen was very still. Priya unfolded her hands. She pressed them flat on the table in the same gesture Naomi had used an hour before, the same grounding motion, the body seeking something solid. You've been carrying that, Priya said. Yes. Since you were 17. Yes. Alone. Mostly. Priya looked at her. Her eyes were wet. Not crying, Priya rarely cried, but the wet of someone holding something back, not from repression, but from the deliberate choice to stay present rather than become the thing the other person has to manage. Why didn't you tell me? She said. We've lived together for 3 years. Because if I told you, you'd look at me differently, Naomi said. Not badly. You'd never look at me badly, but differently. And I needed one place in my life where I was just Naomi, not Naomi who survived that. Priya was quiet for a moment. And now? And now I think the reason I needed that to be a secret was that I believed being honest about it would make me impossible to choose, that anyone who knew the whole thing would— She stopped. Would decide I was too complicated, too much history, too many locked rooms. And she thought about Min-Jae in Seoul, telling her history to his father without framing it as damage. She thought about his father's response. She thought about the man in her living room right now, making the calls that kept his empire running, who had sat across from her in a library for months and had never once treated her like someone who needed to be protected from her own life. And I think I was wrong, she said, about what honesty costs. Priya reached across the table and put her hand over Naomi's. She held it there without saying anything. The gesture was plain and human and entirely sufficient. I'm angry, Priya said finally. At me? At 17 years ago, Priya said, at whoever made you believe that the thing that happened to you was something to be ashamed of instead of something that was done to you. She squeezed Naomi's hand once. And I'm angry it took me 3 years to earn enough of your trust to hear it. I know it's not about me, Priya said. I'm not making it about me. I'm just being honest that it hurts a little, and then I'm putting that aside, because what matters is that you told me, and that's what counts. She looked at her directly. Are we okay? We're okay, Naomi said. We're better than okay. Priya let go of her hand. She picked up her coffee. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with the specific precision of someone shifting back into her most natural mode, He's in your living room. Yes. How long is he staying? I don't know. Are you going to figure that out today? Naomi looked toward the living room, toward the low sound of Min-Jae's voice on the phone, the particular cadence of a man conducting business in a language she didn't speak in a room that was not his own. Yes, she said, today. She gave it an hour. She sat with Priya in the kitchen and they talked about other things. Priya's dissertation chapter, the showcase, the specific and now legendary moment where Priya had waved her entire arm from the 7th row to direct a man in a travel coat to the seat she'd saved him. They talked until the living room went quiet. Then Naomi got up and went in. Min-Jae was standing at the window. He did that when he was thinking. She'd noticed it in the library, in the study, anywhere there was a window. He stood at it with his hands in his pockets and looked out, and whatever internal process he was running happened in the space between him and the glass. How's the network? She said. Intact, he said without turning. The 2-week review window officially closes in 11 days. The senior assessments are submitted. The financial documentation is complete. He was quiet a moment. I spoke with the 3rd associate, the one I said had friction after Jinho's removal. He submitted this morning. All 3, she said. All 3, he said. He turned from the window. The review will conclude formally. My father will communicate the decision at the end of the window. Do you know what the decision will be? No, he said. Genuinely, he doesn't telegraph things. A pause. But the call last night was different from any conversation we've had in 3 years. I don't know what to do with that yet. You said that this morning, too. I'm saying it again because it's still true. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. Below, the street held its Saturday. A woman with a stroller, 2 men outside the coffee shop 3 doors down, a delivery truck double parked with its hazards going. The perfectly unremarkable life of a city that had no idea what was happening up here on the 2nd floor. There's something I haven't told you, she said. He waited. What happened to me when I was 17, she said. You told your father the shape of it. I'm telling you the whole thing. He turned to look at her. She didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the street below. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. I'm choosing to. And she told him. She told it the same way she'd told Priya. Not linearly, not cleanly, but honestly. She told him about the teacher, the high school in a small city where everyone knew everyone and the knowing was the trap, the months of it, the moment she'd tried to report it and what had happened instead, the institution's movement to protect itself, the quiet pressure applied to her family, the specific and efficient way a system can make a 17-year-old girl understand that the cost of her truth is too high to pay. She told him about leaving, about arriving in this city for university with the deliberate intention of building a life where no one had access to the original. She told him about the composition, how the fourth movement had been the thing she'd been unable to write for 8 months because it required her to write something honest about herself. And honesty about herself had been the thing she'd been rationing so carefully for 6 years. She told him about the night she finished it. She stopped. She was still looking at the street below. Her hands were steady. Her voice had been steady throughout, which surprised her. She'd expected it to cost more in the physical sense, the shaking and the tight chest, the body's grammar of distress. Instead, she felt, at the end of it, something adjacent to the feeling after a performance. The specific emptiness that isn't hollow, but open. The space where the held thing used to be. Min-Jae had not spoken. She turned to look at him. His face was not what she expected. She had expected the controlled stillness, the managed attention. Instead, he looked like a man who had received something and was simply in the presence of it, not processing it into usefulness, not framing a response, just holding it the way you hold something you understand is not yours to fix. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words, quiet, direct. Not the apology that asks for something in return, not the apology that functions as transition, just the acknowledgement that what happened to her was wrong and that he understood the weight of it. "I know," she said. "The teacher," he said. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "Whatever you're thinking about doing," she said. "Don't. That's not what I need from this conversation." A long pause. She could see him put something away. Not dismiss it, but place it somewhere out of the room for now. "Okay," he said. "I need you to know," she said. "That's all. I spent 6 years deciding who got to know that part of me. You're the first person outside of that city that I've told completely." She looked at him. "That's what I need you to understand." He looked at her steadily. He didn't perform what he felt. He never did. But she could read him now in the way she'd learned to read difficult music, the meaning in what wasn't notated, the feeling in the space between the marked notes. "I understand," he said. She nodded. She turned back to the window. He stayed beside her. They stood like that for a long time, the street below moving through itself, the two of them at the window of her apartment on a December Saturday. And she felt the thing that had no name, the thing that had been growing in the library and the study and the backstage corridor and the kitchen this morning, settle into something she could identify. Not the terrifying version, not the version that required her to run toward it or away from it or manage it carefully, just the version that was real. The version that had always been going to be real once she stopped constructing alternative explanations for it. "What happens now?" she said. "I don't know exactly," he said. "The review concludes in 11 days. "Yes. And after that?" "After that, my father's decision either changes the operational structure or it doesn't," he said. "Either way, I have the degree requirement. I have the empire I built without his scaffolding. Those things exist regardless of what he decides." He paused. "They're mine." She heard what he'd done with that word. She heard the echo of the conversation in the study, months ago, the first time he'd said it like something that cost him to say. "And us," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the evaluating quiet, not the managed quiet. Just the quiet of someone choosing their words from the true pile. "I don't have a framework for it," he said. "I've spent 3 years building frameworks, arrangements and structures and terms that mean I know exactly what everything is and where it stands." He looked at her profile. "I don't have one for this." "Neither do I," she said. "That—" He stopped. "Terrifying?" she offered. "Yes," he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with the open, careful attention that she had cataloged for months, and only recently stopped being afraid to meet directly. "I've been afraid my whole life that the worst thing already happened to me," she said. "That the thing at 17 was the defining thing. That everything I built after it was just scaffolding over a damage I couldn't repair." She kept her eyes on his. "I don't think that anymore." "When did that change?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Gradually," she said.
And then all at once. The night I finished the fourth movement, he nodded slowly. She could see him understanding it, not intellectually, but the way a person understands something they've also lived a version of. The gradual and then the sudden. The thing that was true for a long time before you could say it. My grandmother, he said. She waited. She told me once that the inheritance she was going to leave me wasn't money, he said. She died before she finished the sentence. I was 14. I spent 17 years wondering what she meant. He looked at the window. I think I know now. She looked at him. What is it? Permission, he said, to choose something because it's yours, not because it's required, not because it demonstrates adequacy to someone who is counting. He paused. Just because it's the true thing. She understood this the way she understood the fourth movement, from the inside without having to translate it. Min-Jae, she said. He looked at her. I choose this, she said. Whatever it is, however we build it, without a framework. She held his eyes. I choose it because it's the true thing. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she felt the weight of being fully seen and didn't move away from it. I choose it too, he said. He said it the way he said everything true, quietly, without performance, with the complete commitment of a man who had spent his life saying things he meant and had finally found something worth saying that was entirely his own. She reached out and took his hand, not the formal handshake of their first agreement across the library table, just her hand in his, standing at a window on a December morning, the street below moving through its ordinary life, completely unaware of what had just been decided above it. He closed his fingers around hers. The review concluded 9 days later, 2 days ahead of the formal window. Kang Min-Jae Sr. communicated through his representative, in the official language of such things, that the operational review had been completed and his son's standing had been affirmed. The representative also delivered informally a secondary message. The elder Kang wished to visit in the spring, at a time of Min-Jae's choosing, to see the operations his son had built. It was not an apology, it was not a transformation. It was a man at the end of his life learning, slowly and imperfectly, to ask instead of summon. The distance between those two things was not small. Min-Jae called Naomi from his office when the message came through. He told her in 4 sentences. She listened. How do you feel? She said. I don't know yet, he said. That's honest. I'm working on honest, she smiled. I know, I can tell. He was quiet for a moment on the line. Are you at the keyboard? Yes. Play something. What? Anything, he said. I'll stay on the line. She set the phone on the piano and played the opening of the fourth movement, not from the beginning, but from the resolution passage, the part that knew what it was. She played it through once, slowly, the way you play something when you're not performing it for anyone but yourself and the person listening from a small speaker on the piano's body. When she finished, she picked up the phone. Still there, he said. Good, she said. The semester ended. The grades came through. The composition thesis received its formal acceptance from the department committee, not without suggestions, 3 pages of notes from the committee, 2 of which she agreed with and 1 of which she didn't and said so in her formal response, which Professor Ellison called appropriately assertive and which Priya called very you. Priya defended her dissertation chapter in January. Naomi sat in the 3rd row of the seminar room and watched her dissect a question from a committee member with the particular surgical precision she used for things she had prepared and cared about. And when it was over and the committee had cleared out and it was just the 2 of them in the emptying room, Priya sat down in the front row and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Well, Naomi said. Well, Priya said, you were perfect. I was adequate. I'll be perfect at the full defense. She looked at the ceiling. Buy me dinner. Yes, Naomi said, obviously. They went to the Thai place 3 blocks from campus. They ordered too much food and talked about Priya's research and the next chapter and the composer residency application Naomi had submitted in December and was waiting to hear about and the general shape of the next 6 months. They talked about the future the way people talk about it, when the present has become stable enough that the future feels like something you can look at.
How are things? Priya said, at the point in the evening when they were past the food and into the tea. Good, Naomi said. Actually good. Specific. Specific good, she agreed. We're figuring it out. What it looks like when it's not an arrangement. And it's different, she said. There's no structure holding it, which is terrifying, and also, she stopped. Also, Priya prompted. Also, it turns out that's what I always wanted, she said. Something with no terms, something that's just chosen every day without a contract. Priya looked at her with the expression she used when something confirmed something she'd known for a while. You sound like the fourth movement, she said. Naomi looked at her. That resolution passage, Priya said. The way it ends. Not with a bang, just settling. Into the right note. She picked up her tea. That's what you sound like. Naomi thought about that. She thought about the 8 months of fighting the piece, the night she stopped fighting it, the morning after the showcase, standing at her kitchen table with both hands around her coffee mug, waiting for a text. She thought about Min-Jae's hand closing around hers at the window. Yeah, she said. Okay, that's fair. The residency letter came in February. An acceptance, a summer program, 12 weeks in a studio with access to a full orchestra for 3 recording sessions. She called Min-Jae first. He answered on the second ring. She told him. Congratulations, he said. Without qualification. She laughed. Without qualification, she said. That's a high bar for you. I'm raising my bar, he said. You said I needed work on the pleas. I've been working on the pleas. You have, she said. It's improved. His father came in April. He was a smaller man than she'd expected, smaller than Min-Jae, quieter in his body, with the specific stillness of someone who had spent decades cultivating authority and had reached an age where the cultivation had become the thing itself. He arrived with 2 associates and checked into a hotel rather than the residence, which Min-Jae told her meant he was defining the visit as formal, which was how he managed his own discomfort with the informal. Naomi met him on the second evening. Min-Jae had told her she didn't have to, had told her twice, had been very clear that whatever happened with his father was not a test she was required to pass. She went anyway. Not for Min-Jae's benefit, because she had spent 6 years avoiding rooms that felt like they had something to prove, and she was done with that particular habit. They had dinner at a restaurant that had the specific quality of being chosen by a man who understood that the right environment was the one that didn't call attention to itself. The 4 of them, Min-Jae, his father, Naomi, and the elder Kang's primary associate who served in a function Naomi didn't ask about, ate in a private room and spoke in the mix of English and Korean that the table required. Min-Jae's father asked her about the composition. He asked with the directness of someone who had decided that small talk was a waste of the time he had left, which she found she respected. She answered directly. He asked about the residency. She told him. He was quiet in the way Min-Jae was quiet, the processing quiet, the weight-bearing quiet. Near the end of the meal, the elder Kang said to her, in the formal, considered English of someone who had learned it as a professional tool and used it precisely, My son tells me you refuse to be managed. She looked at him. Yes. He means this as a compliment, the elder Kang said. I know, she said. I took it as one. The elder Kang looked at his son. Something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, not the warmth of a healed relationship, because some things don't heal, they simply scar and the scar becomes functional. But the recognition of men who have stopped pretending to be something they're not to each other. The elder Kang looked back at her. The piece you performed, he said. My son described the final movement. He's heard it several times now, she said. He says it ends without resolution. It ends without the resolution I planned, she said. It ends with the resolution it found. The elder Kang considered this. He nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man who has understood something and is placing it somewhere it can be of use. The evening ended without drama. The elder Kang shook her hand when he left,
formally and with the brief directness of someone for whom the gesture was complete in itself. He said nothing else to her. In the car afterward, Min-Jae was quiet for a long time. She let him be quiet. She watched the city go by outside the window. The lit buildings, the December gone into spring streets, the city she had arrived in 6 years ago with a composition bag and a carefully constructed self and a very specific set of walls. He liked you, Min-Jae said. He respected me, she said. That's different. From him, Min-Jae said, they're the same thing. She thought about that. Is that enough? She said. He looked at her. It's more than I expected, he said honestly. From him, right now, it's more than I expected. She reached across and put her hand on his. He turned his palm up and closed his fingers. The city moved past the windows. The residency starts in June, she said. I know. 12 weeks. I know. We'll figure it out, she said. Yes, he said. We will. She believed him. Not because the future was clear. It wasn't. It never would be. The world they were building together had too many variables for clarity. But because she had learned, in the months between a university corridor and this car on an April night, that the difference between a framework and a choice was not security. It was courage. She had been mistaking one for the other for a long time. She leaned her head back against the seat. His hand was warm in hers. Outside the city, her city now, fully, in a way it hadn't been when she arrived, held its million separate lives and asked nothing of any of them. She thought about the fourth movement, about the resolution it found instead of the one she planned, about the note that ended it, not triumphant, not declarative, just certain, the sound of something that knew what it was. She thought she understood, finally, why it had taken 8 months to write. She had needed to become it first.